When it comes to money, most people assume that the smartest decisions are always the most logical ones. But life isn't just about logic. It's about what works in practice. In this chapter, Reasonable Greater Than Rational, we'll explore why choices that are practical, flexible, and human-centered often outperform perfectly rational decisions, and how embracing this mindset can lead to smarter, more sustainable financial habits. Why reasonable beats rational? We like to think that the smartest decisions are always the most rational ones. In theory, logic should guide every choice, maximize returns, minimize costs, optimize outcomes. But in practice, life is messier than a spreadsheet. People aren't perfectly logical machines. They're human, with emotions, habits, and limitations. And this is where the power of reasonable decisions comes in. Sometimes aiming for the perfectly rational choice is not only impractical, it can be counterproductive. Consider personal finance. A purely rational approach might suggest investing every last dollar in the highest return, lowest risk assets. But in reality, this ignores human tendencies, fear, impatience, and the need for satisfaction along the way. If your strategy is theoretically optimal but emotionally unbearable, you're likely to abandon it at the first stress point. A reasonable approach, by contrast, balances logic with human nature. It allows room for mistakes, flexibility, and enjoyment, making it sustainable over time. Take saving, for example. A rational plan might dictate cutting every expense to the bone to maximize wealth. Yet for many, extreme frugality is mentally exhausting. They break the plan, spend impulsively, and undo months of progress. A reasonable plan, one that allows small pleasures while still prioritizing saving, may yield slightly less optimal returns on paper, but is far more likely to succeed in practice. In other words, reasonable beats rational when adherence and long-term consistency matter. The same principle applies to investing. Some investors try to perfectly time the market or pick the single best-performing stocks. Rationally, if they could succeed consistently, they'd outperform everyone. But in reality, emotions like fear and greed make perfect timing nearly impossible. A reasonable approach, consistent contributions, diversified portfolios, and patience may feel less precise, but it delivers reliable long-term results. Reasonable decisions also help navigate uncertainty. Life is unpredictable. No model can account for every variable, and over-optimizing for a perfect outcome often creates unnecessary stress. For instance, someone might delay starting a business because the rational analysis shows marginal profits or high risk. Yet a reasonable mindset recognizes that starting imperfectly, learning, and adjusting along the way is often far more productive than waiting for an ideal scenario that may never arrive. This principle extends beyond money. Relationships, careers, and health all benefit from reasonable thinking. A rational approach may push for perfect diets, ideal exercise routines, or flawless schedules. But perfection is rarely sustainable. Reasonable choices, ones that accommodate human limitations, social dynamics, and imperfect information, tend to produce better results over time. In essence, reasonable decisions are human-centered. They accept that life is messy and imperfect, and they prioritize outcomes that are achievable and sustainable. Rational decisions, in contrast, prioritize logic and optimization without always considering human behavior. This doesn't mean you abandon logic. It means you temper it with practicality and emotional intelligence. Consider the story of a friend trying to pay off debt. The rational approach might have been to throw every dollar toward repayment, skipping essentials or cutting off social life entirely. In practice, this caused stress and resentment, leading to relapse. The reasonable approach balanced aggressive repayment with modest spending on mental and social well-being. The debt was paid off slightly slower, but the habit stuck, and the individual avoided burnout entirely. The lesson is clear. Life isn't a series of perfectly calculated moves. Decisions that are reasonable, those that balance logic with practicality, emotion, and human behavior, tend to outperform theoretically optimal choices. By adopting a reasonable mindset, you can make sustainable, effective decisions that keep you moving toward your goals without unnecessary stress or self-sabotage. Reasonable doesn't mean lazy or unthinking. It means practical, adaptive, and human. It recognizes the limits of perfect rationality and prioritizes decisions you can actually follow through on. In the end, it's not about being perfect, it's about being effective in the real world. Practical, reasonable strategies. Now that we understand why reasonable decisions often outperform purely rational ones, the question becomes, how do we apply this mindset in practice? How do we make decisions that are both logical and sustainable in real life? The answer lies in creating strategies that balance theory with human behavior. One powerful approach is setting flexible rules instead of rigid plans. Consider saving money. A rational plan might dictate saving exactly 25% of your income every month. No exceptions. But life is unpredictable. A car repair, a medical bill, or an unexpected opportunity may make that exact percentage impossible some months. A reasonable strategy allows flexibility, perhaps saving 20 to 30% depending on circumstances, so that the habit continues without stress or guilt. The key is consistency over perfection. Another practical tactic is breaking big goals into smaller, achievable steps. Rational thinking might suggest tackling a $50,000 debt in a single aggressive push. Reasonable thinking breaks it down. Focus on paying off a small portion first, then build momentum. Each completed step creates motivation and confidence, making the overall goal more attainable. Humans respond better to tangible progress than to abstract perfection. Reasonable strategies also prioritize behavioral alignment. People often fail at rational plans because the plan doesn't match their natural tendencies. For example, someone who struggles with impulse spending may fail at a strict budget, but succeed with a system that automates saving or uses envelopes for discretionary spending. By designing your financial systems to fit your habits and psychology, you dramatically increase the likelihood of success. Consider investing. Rationally, one might try to pick the perfect stock or time the market to maximize returns. But the reality is that timing the market consistently is nearly impossible for most people. A reasonable approach focuses on long-term growth, diversification, and consistent contributions. While it may not be perfect in theory, it produces reliable results over decades, outperforming attempts at optimization that are doomed to human error. Another practical example is career planning. Rational analysis might suggest waiting for the perfect job opportunity or promotion, but a reasonable approach values progress, experience, and learning along the way. Accepting a good but not perfect role can provide skills, connections, and momentum that eventually lead to much greater opportunities. In other words, reasonable decisions often capture the upside of action while mitigating the risk of overanalysis or paralysis. Reasonable thinking also incorporates risk management. While a rational plan may focus solely on maximizing expected returns, reasonable thinking accounts for human tolerance for uncertainty. For example, an investment strategy that is theoretically optimal but causes stress, anxiety, or sleepless nights is unlikely to be maintained. A slightly less rational but emotionally tolerable plan ensures consistency, allowing long-term compounding and stability. Finally, reasonable strategies encourage iteration and adjustment. Life changes, circumstances shift, and new information arises constantly. Rational decisions may assume perfect foresight in static conditions, but reasonable choices acknowledge uncertainty and adapt over time. By reviewing and tweaking decisions regularly, you stay on track while avoiding the pitfalls of over-optimization. The overarching principle is clear. Sustainability beats perfection. Reasonable decisions are practical, aligned with human behavior, and designed for long-term adherence. They accept imperfection, embrace flexibility, and focus on outcomes you can actually achieve. Rational decisions may look perfect on paper, but reasonable decisions work in real life, allowing you to make progress, stay consistent, and build lasting results. In practice, this mindset transforms not just finances, but every aspect of life: health, relationships, careers, and personal growth. By prioritizing what is reasonable over what is purely rational, you make decisions that are human-centered, effective, and ultimately more successful. The cost of over-optimization. One of the biggest pitfalls of pursuing purely rational decisions is over-optimization. In theory, calculating the perfect choice for every scenario sounds ideal. But in practice, it often leads to analysis paralysis, stress, and missed opportunities. Trying to be perfectly rational in every decision ignores the realities of human behavior and the complexity of life. Take personal finance, for example. Some people spend countless hours analyzing every investment, interest rate, and expense, striving to make the mathematically optimal choice. In the process, they may delay action, miss opportunities, or experience stress that outweighs any potential gain. Meanwhile, a reasonable approach, making solid, well-informed choices without obsessing over perfection, often produces better long-term results. Consider budgeting. A purely rational plan might dictate eliminating every non-essential expense to maximize savings. While this might work theoretically, in practice, it can lead to burnout or rebellion. People often abandon overly strict plans entirely, undoing months of effort. A reasonable approach allows room for enjoyment and flexibility, creating a sustainable habit that continues consistently over time. Over-optimization also appears in career decisions. Some professionals spend years seeking the perfect job, analyzing salaries, benefits, growth opportunities, and cultural fit, only to end up stalled and indecision. Reasonable decision-making focuses on what is good enough to advance your skills, gain experience, and open doors. Imperfect decisions, taken with momentum, often lead to better long-term outcomes than waiting for a flawless choice. Even in investing, over-optimization can be costly. People attempt to time the market or pick the best stocks to maximize returns, constantly adjusting based on small data fluctuations. This can create emotional stress, cause them to sell at the wrong time, or miss out on compounding growth. A reasonable strategy, consistent, diversified, long-term investing, avoids this trap and delivers superior results over decades. The key insight is that life is uncertain, and no plan can perfectly predict every outcome. Trying to be perfectly rational assumes unrealistic control and information. Reasonable decisions, by contrast, accept imperfection, focus on what is achievable, and allow for human error. They prioritize action over analysis, progress over perfection, and sustainability over theoretical optimization. Real-world examples abound. Entrepreneurs who overanalyze before launching a product often miss market opportunities, while those who make reasonable decisions, starting with a minimum viable product, testing and iterating, adapt and grow faster. Similarly, people trying to optimize every penny of spending may end up stressed and inconsistent. While those following reasonable budgeting habits build wealth steadily, reasonable decisions also reduce cognitive load. Life is full of choices, and trying to optimize everyone is exhausting. By focusing on reasonable, human-centered decisions, you conserve mental energy, reduce stress, and maintain focus on what truly matters. This is particularly important when dealing with complex or high-stakes situations, where human error and fatigue are inevitable. The lesson is clear: chasing perfection through rationality can backfire. Reasonable decisions acknowledge reality, human behavior, and uncertainty. They produce consistent, effective outcomes without the stress, paralysis, or missed opportunities that come from over-optimization. By embracing a reasonable mindset, you make progress, preserve energy, and achieve results that matter over the long term. In essence, reasonable decisions are not about settling. They are about winning sustainably. They allow action, adaptability, and resilience, transforming theoretical advantage into practical success in real life. Applying reasonable thinking. Every day, understanding that reasonable decisions often outperform purely rational ones is only the first step. The real value comes when you apply this mindset consistently in your daily life, turning theory into action. One of the most powerful ways to do this is by prioritizing decisions that balance practicality and sustainability. For example, in managing finances, instead of obsessively calculating the mathematically perfect investment each month, Choose a diversified portfolio that aligns with your risk tolerance and commit to it. It may not be perfect on paper, but it's realistic, manageable, and emotionally sustainable, ensuring you stick with it long term. Reasonable thinking also means accepting good enough solutions when perfection is unattainable. In career planning, this might mean taking a position that offers growth, learning, or networking opportunities rather than waiting for the ideal job. The benefits of experience, momentum, and skill development often outweigh the theoretical advantages of waiting for perfection. Acting reasonably allows progress, whereas pursuing perfect rationality often leads to stagnation. Another practical application is designing systems that align with human behavior. Automating savings, scheduling regular check-ins on goals, or creating routines that reduce reliance on willpower all exemplify reasonable thinking. Instead of assuming perfect discipline, you build your environment to make success the default. This approach minimizes friction and increases the likelihood of achieving your objectives consistently. Reasonable thinking also applies to everyday choices and relationships. For instance, in health, instead of attempting an extreme diet that is unsustainable, adopt balanced eating habits and moderate exercise that you can maintain. Over time, these reasonable habits produce far better outcomes than short-lived, perfectly optimized plans that are abandoned under pressure. Even time management benefits from this mindset. Instead of attempting to schedule every minute optimally, a rational but often impossible goal, focus on prioritizing key tasks, creating buffer zones, and allowing flexibility. Reasonable planning acknowledges that interruptions, unexpected events, and human limitations exist, ensuring that you remain productive without unnecessary stress. Consider financial risk management. A purely rational approach might suggest investing aggressively for maximum returns, but reasonable thinking considers your tolerance for loss and stress, ensuring your plan is not only mathematically sound, but also emotionally sustainable. This balance allows you to stay invested, avoid panic selling, and benefit from compounding growth over the long term. Practical decision-making also involves learning from experience and adapting. A reasonable approach recognizes mistakes as inevitable and treats them as feedback rather than failure. By adjusting your strategies based on real-world results, you improve continuously while avoiding the paralysis of overanalysis. Ultimately, the essence of reasonable thinking is sustainability, flexibility, and human-centered design. It prioritizes decisions you can follow through on, reduces stress, and builds habits that endure over time. While rational decisions may look perfect on paper, reasonable decisions perform reliably in the real world, transforming intentions into tangible results. By embracing reasonable thinking in your finances, career, health, and daily life, you create a system where progress is consistent, mistakes are manageable, and long-term goals are achievable. Reasonable doesn't mean settling. It means designing your choices around what is practical, achievable, and aligned with your life. Over time, this approach builds resilience, confidence, and measurable success, far beyond what theoretical rationality alone could achieve. We've seen that practical, reasonable decisions often outperform purely rational ones because they align with human behavior, flexibility, and sustainability. But life is full of the unexpected, events we can't always predict or control. In the next chapter, Surprises, we'll explore how to prepare for uncertainty, embrace the unexpected, and turn surprises into opportunities rather than setback.